Hello, everyone. My name is Mahesh Narayanan. I'm the Program Director for Series A. Thank you very much for joining us today in our Fireside chat with Mr. Demetrios Sapounas, if I pronounced that correctly. Thank you, Demetrios, for joining us today. Demetrios is an executive with Fortune 50 startups and multinational leadership who bridges the gap between business and technology and knows how to leverage emerging technologies to enhance company values. So thank you again for joining us, Demetrios.
Thank you very much for having me.
Excellent. So I would love to give you the opportunity to go a little deeper into your background, how you got started coming into the startup space, the leadership aspects that you've held in many positions you've held in the past and presently. So please go ahead.
Okay. So let me give you a quick overview because there's a lot to talk about, and my background is not as important as the other topics. But to give an idea of where I started and how I ended up where I'm at right now, I was always interested in technology, and the newer the technology, the more cutting edge, the more interesting. So even at the education level, I did my master's in natural language processing. I did my PhD in machine learning, pattern matching, and image processing. And my MBA was primarily on entrepreneurship. But where I started was rather interesting because outside of university work, where I've actually did some teaching as well prior to getting to industry, I was doing the classical medical claims processing on mainframes. And when I got a call unexpectedly from a naval research laboratory saying we would like to bring you in for an interview, I jumped on the idea. And I ended up staying there almost 10 years, doing what I call now as advanced video games, because I was using cutting edge technologies. And at the time, we're talking 30 years ago, working with neural networks, machine learning, AI, distributed processing, you name it. And all of those, not for the sake of research, but how they can be applied to use in naval systems, which of course are mission critical systems. So you understand the risk reward and the things that you need to worry about. So moving on from there, I ended up at a fairly early stage e-commerce company where I was responsible for all their technology infrastructure, operations, and also software development. And that gave me an interesting perspective of how you run an early stage company with small budgets and how you grow 200% in less than 2 years. And of course, that company did a roll-up merger and then an IPO. From there, I went off to start my own company, again in medical claims processing, but this time taking it away from the mainframe and onto the internet, which at the time seemed a great idea. And what happened was we got a fair amount of interest. Unfortunately, timing-wise, did not help to raise any funding, so that died. I mean, we're talking 2001 timeframe. So there wasn't that much fun to be had at that time. More interesting stuff happened afterwards. I ended up doing some work for some 3-letter agencies here in the DC area, working on text processing primarily, and trying to do entity identification and analysis and so on, helping the various intelligence analysts. And that brings us more back into the natural processing area. And that led me to get into another small company, 25 people at the time, that had some interesting products that were focusing on names. So name processing was done, and think about it going into KYC and so on, which company got acquired by IBM and now was working globally across IBM and interfacing primarily with global financial institutions in Europe. And over there, I was responsible for the overall engineering team and the global product development as well. From there, I moved on to another small company in the smart grid space. And that was interesting because I was always fascinated about the space and energy management and so on. And I only stayed a short period there because the company was going through reorganization after reorganization and acquisition after acquisition and so on. But learned quite a bit, and especially how unprotected the grid is. And now that's coming up. I ended up after that at a small nonprofit where we had a telemedicine application that we developed primarily for doctors who were operating in the resource limited areas, and also worked on a project for DARPA to do analysis of social media data to detect signals of PTSD and TBI. And we got funding for a 2-year contract. The way I structured the project, I focused on applications of that. And we did user testing with veterans. And we actually got pretty good results, about 73% accuracy against the baseline, which at the time and given the amount of work that we did was pretty good results. Unfortunately, with DARPA, they don't help with transition, so could not transition that technology. And even now, we have some people who are asking what's going on and how much you have available and things like that. So we'll see if in some time something happens with that. Did some additional interesting stuff, like got involved with another early stage startup to do remote monitoring targeting older population. Great idea. Great technologies, bad timing. It was before we started right before the first iPhone was introduced. The first iPhone was introduced at the end of the first year. We had to develop our own mobile gateway, and it became extremely expensive. Now, it would have been extremely easy to do. So moving forward to where I am right now, I'm doing consulting. 2 years ago, I worked with a small company in the prop tech space, helped them develop their platform and go to market. Have done some strategy work for a company in digital identities. Last year, I was doing M&A integration for FLIR systems here in the DC area, which got acquired by Teledyne at the beginning of this year. And now, complete change. I'm leading change management for Blue Cross Blue Shield Association on a large modernization initiative that I have, which takes some mainframe-based applications, replatforming them from COBOL to Java and moving to the cloud, all in one step. So we'll see how it goes.
That's definitely quite an undertaking, because I've worked in that side, especially digital transformation and kind of moving anything to the cloud from repair systems.
Exactly.
Not thing to do. So that's it should be very interesting to see how that goes. So Demetrios, just want to be mindful of our time and kind of jump into a main topic of today, which is around leadership and leadership, especially when your company is growing. Obviously, you've been part of quite a lot of both small and large companies, and also have seen small companies grow to larger companies. So I would love to get your thoughts on how the transition happens and what the transition should look like going from a founder to a leader in an organization where you're able to now look over much larger growth strategies and then doing the day-to-day things that many startup founders often end up doing. And this is a very relevant topic for pretty much all the companies in our Fireside chat today, who are all kind of growing their company past just proof of concept to now having a market to grow into and become a larger entity very, very soon. So in your mind, how does that transition take place? And in your experience, how have you seen that come about?
It's a very interesting topic and a very difficult transition, because when you're the founder, you're involved in everything that's going on from day to day. So every single decision ends with you. Everything that gets done, you have some input, and you have a very small team. But when you start growing, the first thing that you have to start thinking about is how you disengage from the day-to-day stuff, because now you have to focus on the bigger picture. It's what they say, working in the business and working on the business. So you got to transition to working on the business from a strategic perspective, and you got to address decisions, only a few, the ones that have larger impact, and be more outward focusing and engaging. This transition is difficult, and I've seen it at different levels. I'll give you an example. A number of years ago, I got involved with an early stage company, but it was well funded and at the time over 100 people. And you think they have really good processes and things like that, and the CEO was really strong. Interestingly, the CEO wanted to be involved in every single hiring decision. So even for a system administrator, the CEO will expect that he will interview that person. It may sound reasonable to expect if you're a 5 or 10 person company, but not that of a large company. Furthermore, how busy is the CEO? How's the schedule? Where can you find time to schedule the person for the interview? How long will it take? What happened there is that we've lost a number of people because of the delays, and they got other offers. Does that make sense for the CEO? Probably not. If it is a VP level position or someone who reports directly to the CEO, definitely. But if no, then you got to be able to trust the people that you brought into the organization to make the right decision. And that's the first thing that you got to learn to let go and trust the people who are in the organization, because you brought those people in. So you ought to have some faith that you brought them because they have the skills, you're able to trust them. If you don't, first question is, why did you bring them on? Second, can you build trust? Or even, are they the right people for the organization at the stage where it is? The other important thing is, as a CEO, you got to check your ego. And there are so many CEOs with egos that perceive them, and it doesn't work well. Because as a CEO, it's not only that you have to let go and let others do the day-to-day stuff. You got to focus on the things that are important. And part of what is important is set the vision, set the strategy, ensure everybody in the organization are on the same page and they understand what the direction is where you're looking to go. Furthermore, as the CEO, you're setting the culture for the organization. And that's important because you wanna, I'm saying you wanna, I mean, ideal situation, right? What you would like to do is have a good culture where everybody feels comfortable and cannot wait to get there to work. Irrespective now of whether everything is co-located or distributed, it's all remote. It doesn't make a difference. Technology makes it so that you can do your work anywhere you want. You can collaborate pretty effectively, even remotely. But the culture is something that you can build even remotely. And that's the important thing. So does that answer enough of the question?
It does. And I think, one of the things I wanted to kind of emphasize there, because I've certainly been part of other startups that are not my own, and then I've certainly been my own startups as well. And I think the ones that work the best is when you're able to hire someone who can do their particular work. So either if it's initially as a startup CEO, you're doing everything, including marketing, including financials and business development and product development. But as you mentioned, as you continue growing, those responsibilities need to be given over to whoever you bring in for those particular roles. And I think the most important thing that you mentioned is that you have to get out of their way so they can go ahead and do their jobs, and that's really what that trust building becomes. And you're able to trust them, and you brought the right person in for that particular position, and then you can go do something bigger and better and grow the company. But I think one of the questions that we've often received from many of our CEOs is, how do you build that culture and how do you build that employee engagement if you're not the one, or you're no longer the ones hiring, once you get to 25, 30 people, you're not the ones hiring, the other individuals. So how do you continue building that trust? How do you continue building that engagement with the newer employees? And how do you continue growing that existing culture that you want in your company after you get to that point where you aren't the one interviewing everyone, you aren't the one bringing all the people in? How can you continue doing that?
Right. So as you start building that culture, and you have a core team. That core team needs to understand and also be on the same page with you on that culture. What is culture? Well, it means a lot of different things, but good communication, open communication, having everybody, be open to opposing opinions. All right. Another important thing is, are the people empowered to voice their opinion, or if the leader, irrespective of the level, whether the CEO or VP or director or whatever, whatever they say, everybody else has to follow in line. Okay, those are elements of culture. And to the question on the chat, those, irrespective of whether you're remote or not, transfer. Okay. That part of culture is also what the people that you have are making the hiring decisions can convey. Because theoretically, you would like to have them agree with you on what exactly is it that you're building. And keep in mind, what you're building are two things, all right? One is a product, a service, an offering. And then the other is an organization that has a life of its own. It has a culture and how it works. And the how it works can transfer from you to everybody else in the organization. Yes, you can talk about it, but you have to practice it. And you have to lead by example. And you got to expect others to do exactly the same. So if there is a disconnect there, the culture is going to break. It may not be 100%, it may be 80%. That's something you can address by discussions.
And when it comes to the aspects of communication with the other individuals who are not directly under you in terms of hiring, you mentioned that now it's their responsibility to communicate that same expectation of culture, same expectation of work and experience to whoever's hiring. Do you recommend, or I guess I should ask, how do you recommend a CEO engage with those other individuals? Should it be weekly? Should it be monthly? What should the level of engagement be between the CEO and all the employees, even those that don't directly report to him or her?
It's a great question, and it does change with the size of the organization. When you're in a small organization, it's easy. You can walk around, you meet with the people, you build the personal relationships. As the organization grows, it becomes more and more difficult. Okay, so if you can try to do, at least with your inner circle, the people that report directly to you, on a weekly basis, and have one-on-ones as well, that's preferable. And then you can do bi-weekly or once a month open forums with the rest of the organization. The important thing is to keep that communication going. Okay. As you start growing, then that becomes pretty difficult. All right. You may be able to do it on a quarterly basis, but not necessarily on a monthly basis. But that's why you have the others that you brought on board to be able to do that for you. Okay. There is an interesting way of how you can achieve that. Steve Jobs at Apple had introduced the DRI model, which is directly responsible individual. You can find stuff online about it, but basically, from every meeting, for anything that needs to get done, for every task, there is one person that has been set as the individual who is responsible to deliver that. Now, that person not only is responsible, but also can delegate that DRI to others who work in the team and so on. So that becomes an important tool, and based on what I've seen in other organizations, it works pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking from my own experience, when I was, when I run startups, one of the things, as you mentioned, at least the weekly communication between the people who directly report to you. And I've actually mentioned this to many of the companies on here as a potential way to continue the engagement, even if you're not there in person, especially when we're in the pandemic. We often have like a weekly reporting system. So they send me a 1 to 2 page document on everything that they had worked on, everything that went right, everything that went wrong, and everything they plan to work on next week. And it kind of keeps that communication open, but also it creates that responsibility, as you mentioned, on the individuals themselves to figure out what is working, what they should be working on, what they shouldn't be working on, and where the priority needs to be, and puts the onus on them to kind of determine where that work is supposed to go. And then, me as a CEO or anyone else as a CEO can then figure out, are they in the right track or not, so that you're not necessarily over their shoulder, breathing down their neck on every step that they're taking, but really just having that communication open at any given point, but not necessarily overwhelming them in the communication side, which I think, that there's still a balance that many CEOs that I've seen struggle with, is in how much are they really going to engage with people they directly report to, especially if they don't report to them, how often that communication should be. So I think you provided a really nice idea of maybe bi-weekly as a smaller startup, and then monthly as you grow, and then quarterly as you get to maybe 100, 200 people, where it's just impossible to talk to everyone at all given time. So it may be continuing that conversation whenever it's needed, and
right.
At least making it regular.
But also keep in mind now, yes, you're getting larger, but now you have interesting tools that allow you to engage with someone even when they don't expect it. It's like going around the corner and popping in, right? Slack or some other collaboration tool. Well, you're the CEO. Find someone in there, ping them and say, let's talk. Well, surprise them a little bit, engage with them, all right? That shows that, first of all, you care a little bit to learn about them, what they do, how they like, how they don't like, okay? They call it empathy or whatever you want to call it, all right? But that's part of communication. The other thing you got to think about is that as a CEO, you're the leader, you set the direction, but at the same time, you wear a lot of other hats. You're the teacher, you're the mentor, you're the orchestrator, okay? And when necessary, you're the judge and the executioner. So you play all those roles. It's just determining what's the role you're going to play at any given time and which one works best. I mean, personally, what I found out is dealing with leading teams and even people outside the teams, always try to have some type of person-to-person conversation that establishes a little bit better relationship as opposed to doing it in a meeting. And then what I find out is, depending on how those conversations go, people are going to come back to you asking for help, advice. It turns into a mentoring session, and those help the employees as well as you, because you also learn from them as they learn from you.
Absolutely. Moving away from that particular topic of transitioning to another major topic that a lot of CEOs struggle with is when you are delegating things to other individuals, what should a CEO actually be delegating? Apart from just hiring someone to take up a particular role, what are they actually delegating to them, and how much should they be delegating? What aspects should they be delegating? What does that role look like as you transition from a small startup to a growth size company?
I'm not certain there is a straight answer there, because as a CEO, you can delegate everything you want, okay? And basically say, all I'm gonna focus on is engaging with potential investors or engaging with the market, and you run the organization, okay? But also, you got to play to your strengths, because here's the other thing. You're the founder, but you have to take a hard look at yourself and determine, are you the right person to be the CEO? A lot of founders don't do that, and then they're not the best CEOs and they're pushed aside after a while. So if you take that hard look, you may find out that you're better leading the sales role rather than the CEO, or better at leading engineering. Because the CEO, usually as you start growing, instead of being internally focused, is externally focused. You deal with your major customers, you deal with investors, you deal with other stakeholders, you help sales in major accounts, and so on. And of course, you focus on strategy, where the market is going, where you're going, how you're going to leverage other technologies, and keep in mind every single company is a technology company anymore. And how are you going to be able to grow in the market and create competitive advantages? Because you got to somehow differentiate from everybody else out there. So unfortunately, not a straight answer, but those are the elements that you got to start looking at.
No, I think overall, I think that's the best answer we could give our CEOs is, really look, as you said, at your expertise and figure out where should you be in the organization, and then have the roles, accordingly. And kind of piggybacking on that aspect, how much of that should the founder be responsible for when it comes to things like strategy and things like growth within the company or focus in the company once he or she has given up their role as the CEO? How much input do you see a founder suit playing in those type of aspects if they've given up their particular role as a CEO? How involved should they be in those type of decisions?
That's a tricky question, because the founder is probably still the owner, right, or the major shareholder.
Right.
If we take a corporate approach, and there is an advisory board and there is a board of directors, the founder will probably be involved in both of those. The input that the founder provides should be from an advisory role, not from a dictate role, because now others are responsible for making those decisions. They can definitely have the input. It's not necessarily always going to be taken and run with. And that's another tricky transition that the founder has to go through.
Right, and not every founder has the same ability or even the wish to be able to run the company forever. They might at a certain point say, "I'm done with running the actual strategy and the business growth. Let's bring someone else to take that over while I focus on something that he or she particularly likes within the organization.
Correct.
So no, it's as you mentioned, it's a tricky situation for any CEO, any founder to kind of go through that transition and knowing where they play a role within the company. Because when you're small, as you said, you are, the buck stops with you, right? Everything about the company is on you. But as you continue to grow, you have to figure out how much of the responsibility you want to keep moving forward. And I think the biggest aspect is making sure that you're not being a funnel or a hurdle for your company's growth. I think that's the biggest determination for a company as they grow is the founder or CEO being a hurdle, which I've certainly seen, as you mentioned, if one person's the one responsible for hiring every single person in the company, you become a funnel. You're slowing down the growth of your company. And so those are the type of things that I think a CEO should look out for, or founder should look out for, and are they being their own hurdle and actually growing their company to its own potential.
And actually that's where having external advisors becomes extremely important, to the point where they're trusted enough to take their opinion and then decide how to proceed based on that.
Absolutely. And that goes along to your comment about egos, right? Like you actually do have to put aside your ego as a founder and say, am I doing the best for my company, for its potential growth, and kind of stepping away if need to be to actually let it grow the way you need it to.
Right, so, because at some point it's going to have to be a decision. Is that a lifestyle company or engagement, or is that something that's going to grow and is going to be self-sustaining and so on?
Does luck play an important role? And do you think Apple achieved what has achieved so far if Wozniak was still, there? Again, what are your thoughts between co-founders? Because we've talked mostly about founders, but what about co-founders and that dynamic, and kind of bridging that particular responsibilities?
The dynamic has to work very well. So it has to be understood what one founder is responsible for, and what their influence is, and what another one is, and hopefully there isn't much crossover. At the beginning, yes, there will be, because you're small. But as it starts growing, it's better to separate as much as possible, but still work together as a single team, and be cognizant of the other strengths and weaknesses. And you got to work together. I mean, if there is friction there, it could unravel the whole thing.
And what are your thoughts in actually bringing in a co-founder or potential co-founder after you've raised a seed round, a Series A, kind of now looking at the growth? What are your thoughts in actually bringing in someone to actually take a bigger responsibility moving forward to help grow the company? Or do you think at that point it's too late and just bringing in an advisor team would be a better way to go about it?
It's interesting how you put the question, because after you raise Series A or something like that, I wouldn't consider bringing someone in as a quote-unquote co-founder. He could probably be another leader in the organization, but depending on the exact role that you bring them in, they may report to you as the founder, or they may report to the CEO, or you may be looking to bring in a CEO. So those are the things that should be considered. At the seed round, I'd say, yeah, you can bring a co-founder. But earlier on in the process, it's better than later.
Right. And I think, as you mentioned, the dynamic has to work out well. And I think the longer you work with him or her as a co-founder, the less likely the friction will continue after you get to the growth phase, where it's so important that the leadership works as a unit and not have too much friction, because that is another big reason why many companies fail. Is that it's not just the founder not working, but there's a co-founders not working together properly and not having a unified vision moving forward.
Well, there have been a number of examples where the co-founders were not working very well together and ended up splitting apart and splitting the organization and so on. That killed it.
Right. So again, I do want to be mindful of your time here. But any parting words, any parting advice for our CEOs that are here in this call around this particular topic of leadership and really understanding what a leader means in an organization?
Yeah, I mean, words of wisdom, quote unquote. Okay. So it's important to be visible, to show that you have the initiative and you do what you say. That's extremely important. Communicate, and be as transparent and as genuine as possible. Okay, because that helps the people gel with you, with your personality, understand your vision, and they can do wonders. If there is the feeling that you're withholding or that something is not just right, but you're not saying anything and so on, they're going to start having second thoughts, and then things are not going to be operating as well as they could be.
Excellent. I think that's definitely one of the best advice that you can give any founder and CEO. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all the CEOs and other co-founders and founders that have joined us today in this meeting. And hopefully you found this valuable, this particular chat. Thank you again for everyone for joining, and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you very much, everybody. And I'm definitely looking forward to the next session.
Absolutely. Thank you.